I last spoke on this subject here, we've had quite a damning series of revelations in the Sunday Times. This was on the 21st of last month, 21st of April, in which it was revealed that ODF is apparently involved in money laundering like their clients. Because ODF, although it's a human rights NGO, it's interesting that all of their clients seem to have one thing in common, and that's convictions for money laundering. And as I said before, this isn't a series of isolated criminal activities. This is a very sophisticated criminal syndicate. We have had a lot of speculation about ODF's role. We have also been told on many occasions that Ablязов himself founded Open Dialogue and funds it, controls it. It is certainly the case that the other money launderers involved with ODF, represented by ODF, are involved in Ablязов's crimes. As I say, this is a criminal syndicate. We've had quite an interesting comment which was brought to my attention recently, but it took place in the European Parliament in January, a meeting of the Committee on Financial Crimes, Tax Evasion and Tax Avoidance, Tax 3 as everybody calls it. And it was French MEP Nicolas Bay, and I'm going to quote directly from him. He had openly named Ablязов of having launched a foundation called Open Dialogue. There are now very real questions about the funding of the activities of that foundation. All too often, perpetrators of white-collar crimes are able to pass themselves off as victims. This is another thing that most of ODF's clients have in common, as well as the money laundering convictions. They're all being presented as persecuted political oppositionists in their own countries, or particularly in Kazakhstan and, to a lesser degree, Moldova. After the Sunday Times article, there was a meeting on the 25th of April in Poland where much more was said on this subject, and I'm going to just go out because I want to get the exact words. So I'm quoting now from the Polish Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Szymon Sinkowski, and he said, it's a direct quote, "On April 21st, 2019, the British Sunday Times published an article containing the main thesis of a report prepared by the Moldovan Parliamentary Committee. I would like to examine the involvement of the Open Dialogue Foundation in the internal affairs of this country and the financing of certain political parties. As reported by the Sunday Times, Moldovan parliamentarians accused the activists of ODF of acquiring £1.5 million from Scottish front companies in exchange for lobbying for oligarchs. In their opinion, these companies had to launder a total of £26 million, which was intended to finance organisations suspected of cooperating with Russian intelligence and acting to destabilise countries remaining in opposition to the Russian Federation. ODF, which unusually for a human rights organisation, did hold a licence to supply military equipment into a conflict zone, the Donbass region. That didn't last for very long. The person who had issued, this is very interesting, the person who issued that licence was a former FSB agent. It's in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe where ODF are working quite hard at the moment, and I could name an Italian senator, Roberto Rampi, German MP, Frank Schwaber, a Dutch parliamentarian, Peter Omtzigt, a very difficult word for a Londoner to pronounce, and very interesting, an Austrian member of PACE, Stefan Schinic. Very, very interesting. His name pops up in a Council of Europe report published last year, where he is alleged of acts of corruption.
And no other NGO, it seems, has done so much to stand up for oligarchs and those accused of crimes ranging from fraud to murder in the case of Ablязов. The founder of the ODF, Izan Sverstya, is reportedly currently serving jail time in Ukraine for ordering an assassination. And sources behind the NGO remain murky, to say the least. As Gary mentioned, some reports have asserted that it was under the direct control of Mухtara Ablязов. The judgments against him in the British courts currently total more than $4.7 billion. It's the largest fraud case the British courts have ever seen, and it's been rumbling on for over 10 years now. In a New York court case, he stands accused of commingling funds with the former mayor of Almaty, Viktor Krapanov, to launder money by flipping Trump Soho condos. The Krapanov family are another ODF cause célèbre who they've been trying to get the Interpol Red Notice against removed. From the aforementioned to convicted Russian fraudster Nail Malyutin, a guy who has very strong connections to Aslan Gagiev, whose gang is accused of upwards of 60 murders. The list of clients, which they generally argue are politically persecuted people and have lobbied on behalf of, it makes for very interesting reading. Certainly they seem to always focus on very rich people who have been accused of massive fraud. As Gary mentioned, they've had a contract to supply military equipment and have strong ties to online gambling companies, which is very unusual indeed for an NGO. Poland's special services have been investigating for quite some time now, looking into the ODF and the Silk Road, which is the company of Kozlowska's husband, Bartosz Kramek. They found that funds paid to the ODF may have come from other sources. As found by the National Revenue Administration, Kramek's company, one of the ODF's donors, received payments from corporate entities headquartered in virtual offices in Great Britain. At the time of the statement I received, they had accounted for $1.27 million and 64,000 euros that had been channeled in payments through these companies, which Jordan Ryan covered in his Sunday Times article, and I'll mention those companies a bit more later. I didn't get any more comment out of the Polish government because they said the investigation was ongoing, but other sources who wanted to remain anonymous believed that Kozlowska may have been recruited by the Federal Security Services, the FSB of Russia, through her Crimea-based brother, Petro Kozlovsky, whose former company supplied the Russian Navy. According to a question tabled in the European Parliament by MEP Kozma Zlotowski, following the Russian annexation of Crimea, Kozlowska was granted a Russian passport, and that's been quite widely reported as well. Closer to home for Kozlowska, the Prosecutor's Office of the Ukrainian Oblast of Subcarpathia has confirmed to me that investigations are ongoing there as well, and investigators are taking measures to establish the circumstances of criminal offences and those involved in their commission. So whilst the ODF maintains that it's primarily concerned with human rights, the list of people it lobbies on behalf of put that to question, as many are currently serving jail time or on the run. So a few key figures amongst these. Number one would be Mухтар Аблязов, whom the High Court in Britain found to have committed fraud on an epic scale. Over 10 years since he fled his homeland of Kazakhstan, where he served for Minister of Energy, Industry and Trade, before asset stripping BTA Bank to the tune of around $8 billion. Abyazov's still the subject of numerous court cases around the world. In the United States, as I touched upon, he stands accused in a case with another ODF client, the Krapanov family, of commingling funds to launder money through numerous schemes involving the Trump Organization. In the UK, he fled the country to avoid a 22-month prison sentence for contempt of court. In a case brought by BTA Bank against him and his son-in-law, Ilyas Krapanov. The case rumbles on. Ilyas was recently found guilty of conspiring to breach numerous freezing orders on his father-in-law's assets. Final client I want to mention is Vyacheslav Platon, a Moldovan businessman who's currently serving 18 years for his part in what is known as Moldova as the theft of the century, in which $1 billion, that's an eighth of the nation's GDP, went missing from 3 banks there. Platon was named in the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project investigation into the Russian laundromat, which saw 20.8 billion of stolen funds funneled through Russia into the European Union, and documents seized following his arrest show that numerous flights for Platon's entourage and his lawyers were paid for by the Open Dialogue Foundation. It's alleged that the funds to lobby on his behalf, which the ODF did vociferously, in the European Parliament and at pace, portraying Platon as a victim of political oppression, were funneled through companies registered in the United Kingdom. And interestingly, just to add to that, when those demonstrations were taking place, very recently, Kozlowska got into a huge Twitter spat with the journalist Joanna Lillis, which got quite nasty. Joanna Lillis mostly writes for EurasiaNet and has written a very successful book about the politics of Kazakhstan. Joanna was reporting that the demonstrations numbered about 300, and Kozlowska was getting very angry at her, it's all up there on Twitter, and claiming that there were at least 1,500 people there. What was Lillis looking at? Was she in the wrong place? She was deliberately trying to inflate the numbers to blow it up out of all proportion, and attacking a serious journalist in her attempts to do that.
I'd like to share a thought. It's fine.
Yeah.
Because it's been troubling me for some time. I come from France. I work in the Parliament, to give you some context. And I've noticed that there is an increasing numbers of MPs who took a very aggressive stance towards Kazakhstan. And since we're on the issue, maybe it's a good time. Especially Jean-Luc Mélenchon. You might know him because he's a larger-than-life personality. Love the guy otherwise, but I was surprised to see that every single opportunity he had to attack the country, he would. Which is surprising because he's very close to Moscow and Russia. Russia and Kazakhstan are said to be the closest allies. And also because he's very lenient and supportive of the regime in Venezuela, which has had a rather dismal human rights record recently.
Yeah.
So I was quite surprised that he would attack Kazakhstan on that issue, but it was very Venezuela. And I took a closer look, and it led me to ODF quite quickly, because he would use exactly the same arguments that the ODF would use to defend Mr. Ablязов, saying that the Kazakhstan regime is a tyranny, that he's just a gambler who's trying to save his neck, traveling around the world, being harassed, and that the red nose, the Interpol red notices, are only used to harass opponents. And basically he was saying exactly the same things word for word. And I thought that was rather troubling. And do you reckon it's believable that there's a connection there? Because it seems rather obvious between Jean-Luc Mélenchon and maybe not Ablязov, but at least ODF.
Funny enough, it's not the first time the subject's come up in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
In fact, on EU Today we published something because he said something that was very, very stupid and which had to be commented on to the point where it became the headline of the story, where he said it was just and reasonable, just and fair to hate journalists. That's a pretty stupid one. I insisted on putting that as the headline because then that would pop up on the top of the Google News alerts every time anybody puts his name in.
Yeah. So that would explain his very unfavourable stance on Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
Because it's exactly the same arguments that he used.